Good morning. Welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Social Media Manager for HAR. I'm joined this morning by Bill Berman. Bill, welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for sharing your time with us, and you've provided us some great information that we're going to be sharing, some slides, and even a video clip that we'll be sharing with our members a little later in this program. But before we get started, just a quick reminder that HAR's Virtual Engage Conference is free this year. Towards the end of that timer, you saw a video clip of it. You will learn about a wide variety of topics from industry leaders from all over the country. I'll share more about this towards the end of the program and specifically about our topic today and what we're discussing. You do need to register though, even though it's free. So make sure you register to secure your virtual seat at engage.har.com. So we'll talk more about that later. But for now, again, Bill, thank you so much for joining us. If you don't mind, just introduce yourself for our members, a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. And again, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with your members. So I'm a clinical professor at Suffolk University Law School, and I've been at Suffolk for 20 years, doing mostly housing-related work. I also am the director of Suffolk's Housing Discrimination Testing Program, and that program has been in existence since 2012, and we do housing discrimination testing, and so you'll be hearing a little bit about that in the program. We do education and outreach, enforcement, curriculum, conferences, and we do academic studies like the one that I'll be talking about today. I also worked for a number of years at the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts, and I began my career as a prosecutor in one of the local counties.
Wonderful, wonderful. So again, we're really glad that you could take some time to join us this morning. The topic that we're discussing, you know, it's not a fun one necessarily. Most people would probably rather not discuss this, but it's really important for us to highlight this so that we can move forward. And I know you have some suggestions for our members on ways they can do that. The specific topic that we're discussing today, the Housing Discrimination Testing Program at Suffolk University Law School, was recently released just in July, so this is very recent, and it found high levels of discrimination against Black renters and low-income renters. What prompted this study? What prompted you guys to take this study on?
So, as I said, we do a number of things, and so we do both enforcement work where we are bringing cases where we represent people who have been discriminated against, but we also do these academic studies because what we want to know is, you know, we want to get as good an indication of what's happening in the market as possible, and policymakers really should have data relating to that available to them to make decisions, implement laws, to see where they need to tighten up enforcement. So we do it for that purpose. But and specifically, so you know, one of the things that happens is in our enforcement work, we see patterns of that show up over time in cases. And so one of the things that we saw was a very consistent evidence of discrimination against people with vouchers. So in Massachusetts, which is a little bit different than in Houston, source of income, which means if you have a voucher, is what's called a protected class under our anti-discrimination statute. So it is illegal to discriminate against someone, to treat them differently because they have a voucher. But we saw this over and over again in our cases. And we saw, you know, how it became a frustration to people who were just trying to, you know, give their family a bit of a better life, find safe housing for them, and to move forward. So we thought that would be an area that's ripe for an academic study, so we could find out more precisely, well, how pervasive is this in Boston? So if you don't study something, then you can't know. And what it also has the effect of, so like if you put your head in the sand and you open your eyes, what you see is sand. And so it's good for people in the community to know, you know, this is happening, and here are some of the issues related to it. With respect to race discrimination, that is something that we see consistently, but it's a little bit more difficult to detect. Housing providers often, and in the study, 10% of the time, they flat out told our voucher holders, we don't take vouchers, which is discriminatory. We don't find that with respect to race, people make those kinds of statements now, so you really need to use testing to look more closely at it. We call it discrimination with a smile, though if you are that individual, you feel like you're being treated well, but then when you look at how others are treated who are not in the protected class, then you see there actually is discrimination going on. So we thought it would be important to find out what those levels of discrimination actually are. And we also looked at the question of, is discrimination against voucher holders an excuse for race discrimination? So is it a proxy for race discrimination? We looked at that issue as well.
Okay, so yeah, let's get a little more in depth with it. Recently, we did speak with Bill Dedman about the Long Island divided investigation. If any of you missed that, you can go back to our video section and watch it, which highlighted racial steering specifically by real estate agents, which you found as well, and you'll tell us in a moment. They sent testers of various races to the same real estate agent to see how and if they were treated differently. So if you could tell us a little bit about how your testing was done, and then also what the findings were.
Sure. And I am familiar with that study, and it's a very important study as well. And it gives a snapshot of what was happening in Long Island in the sales market. And so where our study is different is it was restricted. It was solely the rental market that we were looking at. Mm-hmm. And so we worked with an expert, the analysis group, and they are an internationally known economic analysis firm. So they helped us with our methodology. They helped us set up the test, and they worked the study, and they worked with us, and they were the ones who analyzed the data. And so we, based on their advice, trained 200 different testers, and we needed different people because if you send the same people over and over again, it skews the data. So we trained 100 white testers and 100 black testers, and we sent 4 different people, equally qualified, to 50 different rental units. We had 2 testers that were black, one with a voucher and one without, and 2 that were white, one with a voucher and one without. All 4 the same in terms of the types of jobs, credit rating, all the other things you would look at. The only difference was race and whether they had a voucher. So our expert gave us a weekly list of studio and 1-bedroom apartments because we didn't want to introduce familial status as a possibility to skew the data. Mm-hmm. So it was only 1-bedrooms and studio apartments. We got a randomized list, and all of the apartments we got were affordable if you had a voucher. And so all of our testers were equally qualified. Another thing we did was, because we wanted to look at race and to see to what extent black people would be screened out even before they ever received contact with a housing provider. And so we used race-associated names. There was a study that we used that suggested certain names are associated with either being black or white. So, for example, we sent a pair, the black tester would report as Aisha, and the white tester as Allison, or Jamal and Brett, Hakeem and Brendan, so that there would be a suggestion of race even before they met. And unfortunately, what we found in the study was high levels of discrimination essentially through the entire process. And so some black potential renters are screened out before they even ever speak to the person. So those people do not get contacted back, but we know that they're contacting the white individuals back, and they are often getting to go through the entire process. So we're able to pick that up. Also, we looked at even once the individuals make contact with the housing provider, which unfortunately for this group here, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it was brokers who were in Boston doing this. But once they do make contact, we trained our testers to reveal that they had a voucher as soon as possible in the conversation. And very often, the tenor of the conversation would change after they revealed that. And very often, the vast majority of time, they would never get to even see the property. 42% of the time, if you had a voucher, you got dropped or ghosted altogether. And so they stopped communicating with you. And we knew, because of course we're sending 3 other testers as well, or two non-voucher testers, we knew that the housing provider was continuing the process with, most often, with the white market rate buyer and less so with the black market rate. But both of those groups were able to move through the process more so than if you had a voucher. If you had a voucher, the numbers were staggering. So an average of only, if you wanted to see a property, so the data around how many units that people were actually able to see, an average of 15% of the time, if you had a voucher, you would see the unit. And there were a couple of tests where the voucher tester never even got to introduce the voucher. So if you exclude those, it's nearly 9 out of 10 times. If you have a voucher, you will never even see the property, and you're interested in it, you are qualified for it, it is in your price range. That is a source of massive frustration. If you want to see 5 properties in the Boston area, you have to contact 50 housing providers. And it's problematic because vouchers are time limited. And so people have to use them within a certain time. And their promise, is affected in a very significantly negative way because people tend to just take what they can get rather than, taking housing that they are qualified for, that may be better for them in terms of what they're looking for and what they need as renters. And at some point, there's a slide, it's slide number 10 that I know you're showing. I can't see exactly which slides are up when, but what that shows is 80% of the time, the white tester with no voucher gets to see the property that they're interested in. And we know that at least, 10% of the time properties had rented. We don't know about the other 10% and why that happened. But equally qualified black renter looking to see the same properties. We know that the white tester has seen it 80% of the time, only gets to see 48%. So this is a significant barrier to black people in the market. So this could exclude many apartments that would be perfect for the renter, that might be near their work or provide better educational opportunities for their kids, and they're being excluded from these right off the bat. As you can see, if you're looking at the slide, the voucher holders, it's an average of 15% of the time they get to see the same properties. But it doesn't stop there. So unfortunately, the differential treatment occurs through the entire process. And so, for example, if you look at slide 11, it shows how many units that the housing provider told the tester were available. And you could see white testers with no voucher were told about twice the number of units that their black counterparts were told about. This one slide references one of the anecdotes from the testing. There was a white market rate tester named Meredith who the housing provider told her, oh, there's another unit. We don't show this, we don't advertise this because then we'd have to show it to everybody. And we show it only to a select group and talked about the kind of people they were looking for. Well, the black market rate tester did not get told about that. And in that test, the people with vouchers got dropped altogether. So they didn't even get any communication, let alone be told about it. We see a similar phenomenon as to what was actually shown the testers. Again, twice as many units were shown to the white testers with no voucher as the black tester. And beyond that, when you look at, for example, positive comments about a unit, so brokers are salespeople. And so we could see who they were pushing the unit to and who they weren't. And there's another example. One of the white testers was told, you should hurry if you want this property. And a black tester looking at the same property was told, take your time. The form of the discrimination is not as direct as it used to be. And we don't even see evidence of people, the classic example used to be the white tester would be told, here it is, here's another couple of apartments. The black tester would be told nothing is available. We don't see that. So brokers, we imagine, not telling the black individuals looking that nothing's available. But, what they're doing instead is dropping them altogether or, saying, here it is, take a look. But at the same time, treating their white counterpart much better, selling them harder. Our expert picked this up in terms of positive comments, in terms of applications offered. There was a variance in terms of follow-up from the housing provider. There was also a preferential treatment towards the white individual. So this was very important data that people in the Boston area should know because people don't want to see this. They don't see their community as purveying this kind of discrimination. They don't see themselves as part of a community that does this kind of thing, and yet we are. And so it's good for us to know about it. And it is a topic that is good to discuss and to raise the awareness about, particularly if it's not something that you come in contact with or suffer or even aware of yourself. Yeah. So trying to put yourself into the shoes of others who do face this and what it might be like is important to be able to then say, okay, this is an issue, this is unfair, and we should start to do something about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually see some comments from realtors saying that there's even discrimination amongst realtors, black realtors getting treated differently. What I did find interesting, and you touched on this, was on slide number 13, you talked about gatekeepers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. And so one of my hopes in doing this kind of work and shedding some light on what's going on and the fact that brokers are purveying it is, my view that if the culture among real estate professionals shifted, and it can shift, brokers can play a significant role, a significant positive role. And so brokers are very well positioned to, be the ones who are leading and not purveying this. And, so I don't know why exactly the brokers did what they did in our study. It could be, market imperatives. They could be trying to hang on to business of clients who are asking them to do this, even though they know it's wrong. I don't know. But, what we have to do is shed light on it so that people can see this is going on. And then, we can add some levers in terms of enforcement and making it difficult if you do this kind of thing, to end up keeping your license. But that's not the best. It's part of what I suppose a strategy, but the best way to go about it would be, to train people, to give them the information, to show them a little bit about what's happening so that, they can see it and understand it, and then try and recruit brokers into kind of pushing back against this, and creating a culture where people understand, look, this isn't fair, and so we're not going to engage in that. And where also their clients understand that, just because you include anyone who comes along who's qualified, it doesn't mean you have to take just anyone. You can set criteria that you apply in all cases, and if people don't meet your criteria, then there's nothing to say that you have to take them. But don't exclude people just because of who they are, just because they're black or just because they have a voucher.
Yeah, very good. I saw a few comments and questions that I want to touch on really quick before we get into my other questions for you. If I can find it, there was a question about approval for Section 8. Here we go. Nora said, I get calls that they have a voucher, the home has not been approved for Section 8. What would be the best way to respond to that type of inquiry?
And so I think just to be transparent,
Mm-hmm.
And to say, to tell the person, don't discourage them. Say, okay, let's see what we have to do to initiate the process. And then that would require some communication with the landlord and with the housing authority, the entity that's running the voucher, and that would be a good opportunity to educate the client about it. And I'm jumping ahead a little because I know your questions, but in our current situation, there are some landlords that where they're facing uncertainty about whether their tenants can actually pay, who might see the positive side of having a tenant with a voucher where the majority of what their rent is guaranteed by the government. So just, telling them we'll have to go through the process, explaining a little bit to the tenant about what the process is, learning about the process yourself. And I'm not assuming everybody knows about it if you haven't dealt with it. That's another, barrier sometimes, like the red tape and such. Mm-hmm. And I'm always all for looking at these processes and making them easier for people. There are also many communities that are offering incentives for lawyers to participate, for landlords to participate for that reason. Mm-hmm. But, familiarize yourself with the process and here's what's going to happen. Make sure your client knows there's going to have to be an inspection. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing because to identify code violations and fix them is what a landlord should be doing anyway. And then that repair is done. Their property is the better for it. They don't have to worry about somebody getting injured because of a code violation and all of that. And actually, some of the communities that I mentioned are putting resources aside so that if a landlord does take a voucher tenant, that they have access to some funding in order to do repairs. So that's happening in some communities. So what should you do? Don't discourage the person, and try and educate yourself and your client and initiate the process. And if your client doesn't want to take that tenant because they have a bad reference, don't take that tenant. Mm-hmm. But don't take them don't exclude them just because they have a voucher.
And I think you might have already answered Rosie's question. She said, and what if the landlord does not want to get qualified for Section 8? I think you kind of answered that a little bit with educate them on some of the programs that might help. But did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
That's pretty much it. And it's, it's different, in Houston, as far as I know, and people can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I did check when you first asked me to be on the program, and source of income was not, a protected class. So vouchers were not a protected class in Houston. And so people were free to discriminate, but, so it's different than in Massachusetts in that way. But, think about it. You have a program, and part of the purpose is to give somebody mobility, a low-income person mobility to be able to go, where they want to better their life. And at the same time, you allow people to discriminate against them just because they have the voucher. So that that's at odds with the purpose of the program.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of comments, a lot of discussion going on here. How would you, and these are all kind of similar questions dealing, with the landlords here. I saw, what do you do with a landlord that's discriminating based on race, sexual preference, and marital status? How do you handle it if the landlord chooses not to accept vouchers? So a lot of similar questions popping up here.
So if someone's discriminating based on race, and so this is, I think, what we're running into in Boston, that we have to change. And so it appears the culture is such that, people are going along with it. And so simply don't go along with it. You may lose business. That's, not an easy sell for somebody, especially in this economy, although I don't know, some real estate markets are doing quite well in the middle of all this. But, I think that's what it's going to take, is we have to decide as a community that everyone's hurt by this. And so we're not going to go along with it. And if someone is asking you to do that, you say, no, we can't do that. If your concern is you want to make sure you're getting a good tenant, then here's what you do. Set up some criteria, and, so you might look at references. You might do credit check. You might do background check. But if you're going to do it in every case. You can't choose a group and do it with respect to that group. Do it across the board. And, what people are going to find is within any group, you have every kind of person. So there are people you will not want to have as a tenant in every group. And the good thing is to have some kind of procedure in place that will allow you to find out if they're, if they have been a bad tenant somewhere else. But, the flip side of that is in every group, you will have wonderful people and people who you very much would like to have as a tenant. And, just because someone has a voucher or, if someone's a different race, then you don't make assumptions about who they are.
Yeah.
If you want a graphic example of that, the second to the last slide was a program that's 29 years ago already, but not a lot of things have changed since then. And it shows in a number of situations, two young gentlemen, both very, very similar, one black, one white. And you'll see the treatment that the black gentleman gets. And it's very disturbing to see. And so, and the effect that it has on a person, if having nothing to do with who he is as an individual, he's being turned aside and not given the same kind of opportunities, that has a very long-term negative effect on a person. And I think, it's a short video. It's worth taking a look at, and put yourself in the shoes of that person.
Yeah, definitely.
Which was their shot,
Yeah,
based on
I would encourage people to watch that. We'll be sharing that link in just a little bit, so stay with us for a little bit longer as we have a few more questions to address. But all of the slides for today and that video that Bill mentioned, we're going to share that with you guys. I have a question. You've already offered some suggestions. We have 40,000 members, realtors, brokers, team leaders. What can realtors do to move us forward? I would think just showing up this morning to hear what we have to say. I think that's one step already. So kudos to all of you. But what are some things that realtors can do to help move us forward?
All right, and I mentioned a few of them, and certainly like try and educate your client. Look at yourself as an advisor. So you have a very important role in the market, and because it's not you're going to if you do this potentially prevent discrimination, but you're also going to potentially reveal some tenants who might be wonderful, who the person might not have considered. And it's very important. So, for example, vis-a-vis vouchers, I know that you had Richard Rothstein on the program, and kudos, for you for doing that, because the work that he's done and shows is very eye-opening. I know I myself, I found it very eye-opening, and most people aren't aware of that history. But the government did have a role in creating segregation, and then that in turn had a role in creating a wealth and opportunity gap. Vouchers are a way and have the potential of reversing that, which is why it's important and why people should consider them. Although there are kind of economic incentives that may be a little more direct. But there was a study that looked at what happens when you take a child, from a community of less opportunity, and you put that same child in a community of more opportunity. And it's not surprising, the result, but it hadn't been studied, and so there was empirical data now to show that it's not the kid, it's the opportunities the kid has. Mm-hmm. So that child's potential is much higher in terms of lifelong earnings, education levels, health, like all of the things that matter to people. They're connected to housing, and the government played a role in our current housing situation. So, if you help somebody with a voucher, you are helping, to push back against that and to give people real opportunity and make their lives better. And I would think that, that might be something that could give a person some satisfaction if they have a role in doing that. But, like I mentioned before, what can brokers do? Just check in with the clients and see if they have criteria, and that they apply them to everyone. So don't assume someone with a voucher isn't going to take care of the property. There's this stigma, that gets attached, because while of course sometimes that happens, sometimes people with no vouchers don't take care of properties. But just call a couple of references, find out what kind of tenant you have. And I know from my own personal experience, I've represented tenants, many of whom have had vouchers. I've done this for around 20 years, and what they want out of life is what anybody wants. What they first want is safe, affordable housing, and then they want education for their kids. They want to live in a safe neighborhood. They want to have access to economic opportunities, health cares, and just like anybody else. Mm-hmm. So don't make assumptions about people because of their race, because of their income status. Encourage your clients not to do that. Another area is advertising, and so we see this where landlords get into trouble, and brokers, is where they start to describe the person, mm-hmm. Rather than the property. So, and under the Fair Housing Act, if you advertise in a way that expresses a preference, that on its face is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Mm-hmm. So take a look at what ads your clients are using and what you are using. So we had a recent case where one of our clients was discriminated against by like 6 different brokerage entities in the same area, and one of those in particular was over and over again engaging in advertising that facially, on its face, violated the Fair Housing Act. And so, all of those individuals wound up being pursued by the Attorney General's office, who then ended up settling all of those cases, requiring training. There was a big payment that people had to make, and they had to change their advertising practices. So don't say, professionals only or perfect for a grad student, single grad student. Don't refer to the type of family you want. Like professionals only might discourage somebody who can afford the apartment, but they have a disability and are not a professional. So that's an area that brokers can have a big impact on. Part of it is, and when everyone will be in a position to stand up and say this is wrong, that's when progress will happen. So what can you do? You can be part of that, and I recognize that's not easy, particularly if this is your business. But nobody wants to engage in illegal activity, and so I think that can be, if you have that approach, that's important. Another thing, the last thing I'll say, this doesn't necessarily have to do with dealing with your clients, but look at yourself and your own community and your own network. Who's in that network? And does everyone in that network look like you? And if that's the case, what you might consider doing is reach out to those who don't necessarily look like you, because what you find is, that will make for, a richer network that you have and bring more opportunity and more understanding. So whether it's, your referral network or who you hire, those kinds of things send a message, what attorneys you refer to. Those kinds of things are in your control, and sometimes it's the small things that people can do. Even just socially reaching out to someone and saying, hey, let's get coffee, or I guess do Zoom or whatever, now, to try and understand someone rather than, just think you understand them without having actual direct contact with them. So
thank you. Those are excellent suggestions. I did see one comment that I just wanted to read because I think it's a good point. Shirlene said, we might see more vouchers coming based on our current crisis with unemployment, and realtors need to be prepared. So hopefully this will help prepare you. I do have one final question for you. We heard this with Bill when Bill Dedman was on. Well, that was in Long Island, and the test that you did, well, that was in Boston. Do you have any doubt that the results would be different if this was done in Houston? And also, are there plans for additional testing in the future, maybe in other metropolitan cities?
Sure. And so we will most definitely, we are always looking for what our next academic study should be and where it should be. And we would most definitely look at, be willing to look at other cities. I do think we would find similar results in other places. And I don't think it's fair to say if nobody's ever studied it. What you can't say is it's not happening. You can only say that if there's evidence of that. So, part of what's important in the process is for people to support these efforts to generate data. And so if your area is never studied, then you're just not going to know. It is likely it's happening because, it's happening in a lot of other places. I understand our study can only tell us about the Boston area at that time, but that's important as well. We are not exceptional. Our community needs work. And so the only way you can know that is if you take a close look at the issue. So yes, we will be doing further studies. We hope to expand our capacity and do them in other areas. And, we hope there are resources in place for that to be widespread so people know exactly what's happening.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for all the information you shared today. We did share the link to Bill's slides and the video that he mentioned in the comments. Just before we go, another quick reminder that HAR's Virtual Engage Conference is free this year. This is the first time ever it's free. And actually, on day one of Virtual Engage, Thomas Mouton, who is our HAR's 2020 Secretary Treasurer and the chair of the newly formed HAR's Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, he's going to be discussing what the task force has been working on and their plans for the future. We will also hear from speakers Bill Dedman, who we referred to a bit in today's program, and Elizabeth Korber-Glynn on racism in real estate. So even though it is free, you do need to make sure you register for it. That's engage.har.com. Bill, again, thank you so much for this information today, and thank you for sharing those slides so that our members can look into it a little bit deeper.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. We will be back next Monday at 9 a.m., so we'll see you then. Have a great week. Bye-bye.